Miss Twit gets a stretching. Mr. Twit led Miss Twit outdoors where he had everything ready for the great stretching. He had 100 balloons and lots of string. He had a gas cylinder for filling the balloons. He had fixed an iron ring onto the ground. "Stand here," he said, pointing at the iron ring. He then tied Miss Twit's ankles to the iron ring. When that was done, he began filling the balloons with gas. Each balloon was on a long string, and when it was filled with gas, it pulled on its string, trying to get up and up. Mr. Twit tied the ends of the strings to the top half of Miss Twit's body. Some he tied around her neck, some under her arms, some to her wrists, and some even to her hair. Soon there were 50 colored balloons floating in the air above Miss Twit's head. "Can you feel them stretching you?" asked Mr. Twit. I can," cried Miss Twit. "They're stretching me like mad." He put on another 10 balloons. The upward pull became very strong. Miss Twit was quite helpless now, with her feet tied to the ground and her arms pulled upwards by the balloons. She was unable to move. She was a prisoner of Mr. Twit. She was a prisoner, and Mr. Twit had intended to go away and leave her like that for a couple of days and nights to teach her a lesson. In fact, he was just about to leave when Miss Twit opened her big mouth and said something silly. "Are you sure my feet are tied properly to the ground?" she gasped. "If those strings around my ankles break, it'll be goodbye to me." And that's what gave Mr. Twit his second nasty idea. Miss Twit goes ballooning up. "There's enough to pull me here to take me to the moon," Miss Twit cried out. "To take you to the moon?" exclaimed Mr. Twit. "What a ghastly thought! We wouldn't want anything like that to happen. Oh dear me, no." "We most certainly wouldn't," cried Miss Twit. "Put some more string around my ankles quickly. I want to feel absolutely safe." "Very well, my angel," said Mr. Twit, and with a ghoulish grin on his lips, he knelt down to her feet. He took a knife from his pocket, and when with one quick slash, he cut through the strings holding Miss Twit's ankles to the iron ring. She went up like a rocket. "Help!" she screamed. "Save me!" But there was no saving her now. In a few seconds, she was high up in the blue, blue sky and climbing fast. Mr. Twit stood below, looking up. "What a pretty sight," he said to himself. "How lovely all those balloons look in the sky, and what a marvelous bit of luck for me. At last the old hag has lost and gone forever." Miss Twit goes ballooning down. Miss Twit may have been ugly, and she may have been beastly, but she was not stupid. High up there in the sky, she had a bright idea. "If I can get rid of some of these balloons," she said to herself, "I will stop going up and start to come down." She began biting through the strings that held the balloons to her wrists and arms and neck and hair. Each time she bit through a string and let the balloon float away, the upward pull got less on her rate of climb. Let me try that again. The upward pull got less, and her rate of climb slowed down. When she had bitten through 20 strings, she stopped going up altogether. She stayed still in the air. She bit through one more string. Very, very slowly, she began to float downward. It was a calm day. There was no wind at all, and because of this, Miss Twit had gone absolutely straight up. She now began to come absolutely straight down. As she floated gently down, Miss Twit's petticoat billowed out like a parachute, showing her long knickers. So knickers is a British way of saying underwear. And so you can see her long underwear, which long underwear are kind of like leggings. It was a grand sight on a glorious day, and thousands of birds came flying in from miles around to stare at this extraordinary old woman in the sky. Mr. Twit gets a horrid shock. Mr. Twit, who thought he had seen his ugly wife for the last time, was sitting in the garden celebrating with a mug of beer. Silently, Miss Twit came floating down. When she was about the height of the house above Mr. Twit, she suddenly called out on the top of her voice, "Here I come, you grisly old grunion, you rotten old turnip, you filthy old frumpet." Mr. Twit jumped as though he had been stung by a giant wasp. He dropped his beer. He looked up. He gasped. He gaped. He gurgled. A few choking sounds came out of his mouth. "Ah!" he said. "Ah! Ouch!" "I'll get you for this," shouted Miss Twit. She was floating down right on top of him. She was purple with rage and slashing the air with her long walking stick, which she had somehow managed to hang on to all this time. I'll swish you to a swazzle," she shouted. "I'll swash you to a swizzle. I'll gnash you to a nozzle. I'll nosh you to a nazzle." And before Mr. Twit had time to run away, this bundle of balloons and petticoats and fiery fury landed right on top of him, lashing out with the stick and cracking him all over his body. Crash. The house, the tree, and the monkey cage. But that's enough of that. We can't go on forever watching these two disgusting people doing disgusting things to each other. We must get ahead with the story. Here is a picture of Mr. and Miss Twit's house and garden. Some house. It looks like a prison, and not a window anywhere. "Who wants windows?" Mr. Twit had said when they were building it. "Who wants every Tom, Dick, and Harry peering in to see what you're doing?" It didn't occur to Mr. Twit that windows were meant mainly for looking out, not for looking into. And what do you think of this ghastly garden? Miss Twit was the gardener. She was very good at growing thistles and stinging nettles. "I always grow plenty of spiky thistles and plenty of stinging nettles," she used to say, "to keep out nasty, nosy little children." Near the house you can see Miss Twit's workshed. I'm having trouble reading this morning. Whew. Near the house you can see Mr. Twit's workshed. To one side there is a big dead tree. It never has any leaves on it because it's dead. And not far from the tree you can see the monkey cage. There are 4 monkeys in it. They belong to Mr. Twit. You can hear about them later. Hug tight sticky glue. Once a week, on Wednesdays, the Twits had bird pie for supper. Mr. Twit caught the birds and Miss Twit cooked them. Mr. Twit was good at catching birds. One day before Bird Pie Day, On the day before Bird Pie Day, he would put a ladder up against the big dead tree and climb into the branches with a bucket of glue and a paintbrush. The glue he used was something called Hug-Tight, and it was stickier than any other glue in the world. He would paint it along the top of the branches and then go away. As the sun went down, birds would fly in from all around the roost. As the sun went down, birds would fly in from all around to roost for the night in the big dead tree. They didn't know, poor things, that the branches were all smeared with horrible Hug-Tight. The moment they landed on the branch, their feet stuck, and that was that. The next morning, which was Bird Pie Day, Mr. Twit would climb up the ladder again and grab all the wretched birds that were stuck to the tree. It didn't matter what kind they were: song thrushes, blackbirds, sparrows, crows, little Jenny Wrens, robins, anything. They all went into the pot for Wednesday's bird pie supper. Remember, supper means dinner. 4 sticky little boys. On one Tuesday evening, after Mr. Twit had been up the ladder and smeared the tree with Hug-Tight, 4 little boys crept into the garden to look at the monkeys. They didn't care about the thistles and stinging nettles, not when there were monkeys to look at. After a while, they got tired of looking at the monkeys, so they explored further into the garden and found the ladder leaning against the big dead tree. They decided to climb it, just for fun. There's nothing wrong with that. The next morning, when Mr. Twit went out to collect the birds, he found 4 miserable little boys sitting in the tree, stuck as tight as could be by the seat of their pants to the branches. There was no birds, because the presence of boys had scared them away. Mr. Twit was furious. "As there are no birds for my pie tonight," he shouted, then it'll have to be boys instead. He started to climb the ladder. "Boy pie might be better than bird pie," he went on, grinning horribly. "More meat, and not so many tiny little bones." The boys were terrified. "He's going to boil us," cried one of them. "He'll stew us alive," wailed the second one. "He'll cook us with carrots," cried the third. But the 4th little boy, who had more sense than the others, whispered, "Listen, I've just had an idea. We are only stuck by the seat of our pants, so..." "Quick, unbutton your pants and slip out of them and fall to the ground." Mr. Twit had reached the top of the ladder and was just about to make a grab for the nearest boy when they all suddenly tumbled out of the tree and ran for home with their naked bottoms winking at the sun. The Great Upside-Down Monkey Circus. Now for the monkeys. The 4 monkeys in the cage in the garden were all one family. They were Mugglewump and his wife and their 2 small children. But what on earth were Mr. and Mrs. Twit doing with monkeys in their garden? Well, in the old days, they had both worked in a circus as monkey trainers. They used to teach monkeys to do tricks and to dress up in human clothes and to smoke pipes and all the rest of that nonsense. Today, although they were retired, Mr. Twit still wanted to train monkeys. It was his dream that one day he would own the first great upside-down monkey circus in the world. That meant that the monkeys had to do everything upside down. They had to dance upside down on their hands with their feet in the air. They had to play football upside down. They had to balance on top. They had to balance one on top of the other upside down, with Mugglewump at the bottom and the smallest baby monkey at the top. They even had to eat and drink upside down, and that was not an easy thing to do because the food and water has to go up your throat instead of down. In fact, it is almost impossible, but the monkeys simply had to do it, otherwise they got nothing. All this sounds pretty silly to you and me. It sounds pretty silly to the monkeys too. They absolutely hated having to do this upside down nonsense day after day. It made them giddy, standing on their heads for hours on end. Sometimes the two small monkey children would faint with so much blood going to their heads. But Mr. Twit didn't care about that. He kept them practicing for 6 hours every day, and if they didn't do as they were told, Miss Twit would soon come running with her beastly stick. The Roly-Poly Bird to the rescue. Mugglewump and his family longed to escape from the cage in Mr. Twit's garden and go back to the African jungle where they came from. They hated Mr. and Mrs. Twit for making their lives so miserable. They also hated them for what they did to the birds every Tuesday and Wednesday. "Fly away, birds!" they would shout, jumping about in the cage and waving their arms. "Don't sit on the big dead tree. It's just been smeared all over with sticky glue. Go and sit somewhere else." But these were English birds, and they couldn't understand the weird African language the monkeys spoke. So they took no notice and went on using the big dead tree and getting caught for Miss Twit's bird pie. Oh, look at this picture. Then, one day, a truly magnificent bird flew down out of the sky and landed on the monkey's cage. "Good heavens!" cried all the monkeys together. "It's a Roly-Poly Bird. What on earth are you doing over here in England, Roly-Poly Bird?" Like the monkeys, the Roly-Poly Bird came from Africa and spoke the same language as they did. "I've come for a holiday," said the Roly-Poly Bird. "I'd like to travel." He fluffed his marvelous colored feathers and looked down rather grandly at the monkeys. "For most people," he went on, "flying away on holiday is very expensive, but I can fly anywhere in the world for nothing." "Do you know how to talk to these English birds?" Mugglewump asked him. "Of course I do," said the Roly-Poly Bird. "It's no good going to a country and not knowing the language." "Then we must hurry," said Mugglewump. "Today is Tuesday, and over there you can already see the revolting Mr. Twit up the ladder painting sticky glue on all the branches of the big dead tree. This evening, when the birds come in to roost, you must warn them not to perch on the tree, or they will be made into bird pie." That evening, the Roly-Poly Bird flew around and around the big dead tree, singing out, "There's sticky stuff all over the tree. If you land on the branches, you'll never get free. So fly away, stay up high, or you'll finish up tomorrow in a hot bird pie." No bird pie for Mr. Twit. The next morning, when Mr. Twit came out with his huge basket to snatch all the birds from the big dead tree, there wasn't a single one on it. They were all sitting on top of the monkey cage. The Roly-Poly Bird was there as well, and Mugglewump and his family were inside the cage, and the whole lot of them were laughing at Mr. Twit. So I'm going to stop there for today, and we will continue later with Still no bird pie for Mr. Twit.